our culture is becoming more and more convenient. With just a single click, you can watch movies, text someone, or order food at your home. And with the introduction of AI, things are becoming even more easier. There are supposedly many things that AI has made easier, but one of the things that I find particularly interesting is how it has made the process of answering questions so much more easier. You got any curiosities? Just ask AI. You really need to understand about something? Just ask AI. You want to write your essay? Just ask AI. It used to be that people used to say, oh, just Google it. Now, most of the people I encounter say, just use ChatGPT, which is rather weird because it used to be that Google was not considered a very good source, but now it's AI. So that's the thing. But if you ask anything from AI, it will give you a rather confident and good sounding answer. It has never been so easier to get your questions answered. Earlier it used to be that you had to read various different articles and read various different books if you really have to research something really deeply. But now with AI, you can just ask anything and it will give you rather good summaries and it will give you some good resources. But I argue that this convenience is actually bad for us. First of all, is of course the less need of thinking because you have all these chatbots to answer your questions, there's far less need to actually think about and research about things. And this is becoming more and more prevalent because how easy it is. You see, anything that is more easy and convenient is going to sell more because people are more inclined towards easier things. That is why social media and particularly short form content is so much more popular because how convenient it is. You do not really need to think about it. You just open your phone and start scrolling. There's almost zero effort put in it. You can spend countless hours scrolling through it without ever thinking about what you're doing. It is also very easy to sell you things when you're not thinking. That's why we are seeing such an influx in things becoming more and more convenient. I often wonder what would Socrates or Plato would have thought about all this AI thing. Because if you know anything about Socrates, you would know how he was given a life sentence because he just asked too many questions. I think AI would have saved Socrates' life. But Socrates' case is a very important one to consider here. If you have ever read Plato, you might have encountered the word Socratic method or the dialectics. In simple terms, it is a process where two people discuss a topic, and by this discussion, they uncover deeper truth about their own assumptions and things they are discussing. In his dialogues, Socrates is often presented as asking someone various different questions like what is truth, what is morality, what is justice, which may sound a little weird to us because we often take granted these sorts of assumptions. And the other person too in these dialogues often come up with rather general answers to these questions, but Socrates would often refute and would go on further questioning. With this process of continuously questioning, Socrates tries to come up with the real truth and get away from the dogma. And that's why reading Plato feels so much more different. It feels like you're actually sitting with him and you are taking part in that conversation. That's why this dialectic method has been so much influential in philosophy. This process is not just about coming up with the correct answers, but it's also about knowing things that we do not know. We in everyday life take a lot of things for granted. We don't really think about what is real, what is truth. But by this process, we are forced to question our own beliefs. And that is the thing that we are losing with AI. It does not allow for such deeper thinking. When you ask something from AI, it does come up with a rather good explanation and answer to that question. But that is all. That's the end of discourse. You did not really participate in any sort of conversation or discourse. You asked a question, you were given an answer. And that is really detrimental to our learning because the process of learning is actually much more important than the results of it. Consider a PhD program where you are given a question that you have to answer at the end. For that, you will spend a considerable time researching about it. You will look into primary sources, various secondary literatures, and you'll just try to gather as much information as you can to answer that one particular question. Now, you can always ask ChatGPT to answer that question, but I highly doubt that you will have the same kind of knowledge as a PhD student who spends so much time researching on that particular question. And that's what I want to highlight on. You see, philosophy is often accused of being overly complicated about things that do not really need so much attention. It has almost failed to answer any fundamental question about humanity. It has took over more than 2000 years and it has still not come up with answers to life's most basic questions like are we real? What is reality? What is justice? What is truth? And in today's world, where we need things done in almost seconds, if a thing is taking more than 2000 years, we might just get rid of it. Spare me the effort, Socrates. I have business to attend. A few days ago, I came across a wonderful article in which the author discussed this very same problem about how not knowing is not always bad. And he noted that the further we go away from the primary sources, the more confident the answers become. For example, let's say I want to know about justice. I have the choice of either directly consulting a primary source, such as the Republic by Plato or any other philosophy text. But anyone familiar with this book knows that the answers in it are not straightforward. Socrates just do not state what is justice. He will go on and on questioning and refuting of what justice is. And in the end, we do not still have a very direct and authoritative answer to that question. Now, if you go to secondary literature like companions to these primary sources or other essays by other scholars in that field, they are really good in giving you rather good understanding of these topics. But by going further from the actual primary resource, you're relying on someone else's interpretation. So you do have that, but you do get some answers quite directly. Now, they are still quite difficult. Anyone who have read some anthology or some introductions to things do know about it. But if you want things even more easier, you can of course go to documentaries or research on internet. You can look forward for various articles that are made for beginners and the answers in it will be even more confident. And now if you want to get away from all that complexity, you can always just ask an AI chatbot to answer that question. It will give you a rather straightforward and confident looking answer. Now, I do want to note that in this whole process, you can see how the further away we are moving from the primary source, the more easier and confident our answers are becoming. If you ask a chatbot the question of what is truth, it would give you a rather good and confident answer. But if you ask Socrates this question, you will be spending 2000 years and you still won't have a really good answer to it. And this is a very important point to note because it does say that the more knowledge someone has, the more open they are toward more discourse and research. They're open for more further discussions and they will understand the more intricate part that goes into researching something. It's not just about the answers they come up with, but rather the extra knowledge that comes with researching that particular question. It's almost like how in school we are often given a book that we have to write essay on. Now you can always just read that book, which is the correct way of doing things. But if you do not have the patience or time, you could watch a documentary or you could just look for summary. But now students are even shying away from that and just using AI to summarize their topics and using AI to even write their essays. There are actually studies that show that using chatbots and AI is actually detrimental to learning. An MIT study found out that the use of AI was linked to lower cognitive development in its users. It looked at students who fully relied on AI to write their essays, those who did not rely on it, and those who used both approaches. It found out that students who fully relied on AI were much less engaged and they performed poorly. They also showed lower satisfaction from their essays. On the other hand, groups who did not rely completely on AI performed better and were more engaged in their essays. Students who relied on AI also became more lazier, often relying on completely copy and pasting their essays from AI chatbots. So all this shows that how completely relying on some tool to do your things is not always a good idea. The more you put an effort to something, the better you get. Take, for example, writing or painting or doing almost anything. The more you do something, the better you get at it. The more you write, even if it starts with rather bad drafts, or even if you are not really good at painting, but you keep on practicing, you do start to get better. No one is really born with a natural talent. Everyone who is good in their fields become by more and more practice. And that practice requires you to take longer and more hard ways to do things. If you are relying on easier paths like using an AI, you are not really going to get any well in that craft. You can obviously write your essays and articles with AI, but that does not mean that you are going to get any better in writing. You can always write your code with AI, but that will not make you a good coder or a good artist. But there is something I really want to discuss about because we live in a world that promotes more efficiency over quality. We want things done as much quickly as possible. And there's a reason why people are using AI, even if they don't want to. Things are becoming really competitive these days, even in schools. If you are not really using AI these days, you will fall behind because almost everyone else using AI. That's why more and more people have to use AI even if they don't want to. Now, I have discussed a lot of things here, but one of the main points of this video is, of course, to talk about the importance of putting effort. We often overlook the importance of doing things the hard way. For example, take writing. I see a lot of people think that writing is useless these days. You can have AI to write most of your things. You just have to think about and you can write a prompt about it and you have your essays or whatever you are talking about generated. But this is not how learning works. Writing is not just about putting your ideas on a paper. Rather, writing is a sort of thinking in itself. Let me make this clear. While you're writing, you're not just writing about the ideas that you have previously thought, but when you're writing, you're also structuring and thinking about more new ways of that topic. If you have ever wrote an essay by yourself, you might have understood that while you write, you actually gain more insights and more ideas about that topic. I am a firm believer that you do not really learn about something until you write about it. Because writing challenges you to look at your learning. You may think, oh, I know about this topic, but writing makes you really understand and deeply think about those things. That's why it is such an important part of any learning process. And that goes for a lot of things as we talked about. In creating art, people often think about, oh, we have AI to create art and it can generate a rather good painting. Of course, it I'm not sure, and I would certainly disagree. But apart from just making beautiful photos, art has a lot of other purposes. One of the rather personal purpose is meditation. Making art is a very meditative work. When you're creating art, you have to put a lot of deep attention into it. And with that deep attention also comes a sort of meditation. You start to calm down. You start to take things a little slower. You start to think about what you are doing. It is sort of how most meditations work. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han describes this phenomena quite well in his book, The Burnout Society. He talked about many things in that book, and one of the things he talked about in his book was how our society has become an achievement society where it is no longer about someone putting pressure on us to do something. Rather, we become our own bosses and we challenge ourselves to do more and more stuff. Taking things in control, doing more, and being more productive and efficient. But he notes that by doing this, we are actually decreasing our capacity to contemplate and looking at things more deeply. He talked about how we are now engaged in an hyper attention where our attention is not directed towards one thing, but rather it is split in various directions. Hustle culture is quite a good example of it. You're often encouraged to make more streams of money through various different ways and requires your attention to be put in various different parts at the same time. Social media also works like this. You're not really giving attention to what you are consuming, rather, you are just mindlessly scrolling. This is what Byung-Chul Han points out is the hyperattention. He contrasts this to what he calls vita contemplativa. I'm not sure that's the correct pronunciation, so I apologize for that. But it is a life of contemplation. Life of contemplation is much more deeper. It requires a deeper attention towards things. It is not about just mindlessly consuming, but it is a way of looking at things and taking them as they come. It's a sort of mindfulness about what you're doing. This approach to life is much more profound and more fulfilling. Now I can put his theory in more practical ways. For example, you can learn countless facts from internet and social media, but I really do not think that you can learn deeply enough. You just have some superficial knowledge about something and you're solely relying on the speaker's understanding of that topic rather than doing your own thinking. Instead, if you actually put deep attention towards a topic by researching about it, by reading different books about it, you get a much more deeper knowledge in that field. You may not be very well versed in various different facts, but you do have a certain deeper knowledge in that particular field. And that's really important because it is quite good to know about various different stuff, but you also require something that you have passion in. Now, I know that not everyone wants to be an expert in everything. And in most of the time, being efficient is actually kind of good. You do not really need to always be thinking about doing the most mundane and simple things. But I do want to highlight that we should not really substitute deeper learning and research and putting effort in things with these simpler and convenient things. Because at the end of the day, as we have saw it, it destroys your creativity. It does not allow you to think. You know, a lot of times, good ideas come when you encounter problems. When you do things the hard way, you encounter real problems. And that is the time that you should really focus on because those problems are things that you can find answers to. A lot of good things come through this way. A person encounters a problem and then they make a solution for it. So there are plenty of advantages of actually taking the longer path. Well, that's for all today. I think I've made my things pretty clear. I would like to hear your own thoughts about this, so share it.